So let's talk about something that's quietly happening inside even the best run tech companies. We're going to dive into a recent engineering productivity report to uncover this silent killer of productivity. And here's a hint, it has nothing to do with working harder. It's actually a fundamental flaw in how we think about and design for an engineer's time.
I want you to think about your engineering team for a second. On the surface, everything probably looks pretty good, right? Sprints are closing, features are shipping, but what if I told you that just beneath that veneer of progress, your team's productivity is slowly leaking away every single day? It's a leak that eventually drains innovation and product quality.
And that right there, that's the core of it. This isn't some big, dramatic explosion. It's more like a slow, quiet erosion, a hidden threat that just builds and builds until it's suddenly a massive problem. So let's figure out where this erosion actually starts.
It all begins with what the report calls the productivity illusion. And this is that really dangerous gap between what we think is happening with our teams and what's actually happening on the ground, day in and day out.
Check this out. If you ask engineers if their current role lines up with what they were hired to do, a massive 88% of them will say, yep, it's completely or mostly aligned. So on paper, everything looks perfect. The problem is, that's not the whole story. See, the real disconnect isn't about their job title or their responsibilities. It's about their calendar. It's the huge difference between role alignment, having the right job, and time alignment, which is all about how their actual focus gets chopped up and fragmented every single day. And this gets right to the heart of the matter. Productivity isn't lost because you have people in the wrong seats. No, it's lost in all those small daily moments where their time and their brain power are being eaten up by things that aren't their core mission, building an amazing product. So, okay, where are all these hours actually going? The report calls this the time design problem. And it's basically a failure to intentionally structure an engineer's week to allow for that deep, focused work they need to do. Let's get really specific about the culprits. Well, no big surprise, meetings are at the top of the list, a time sink for almost half of all engineers. But the real shocker here is what's number 2, interviews and hiring. This one activity is a major time drain for over a third of engineers. We're not talking about a small distraction. This is a huge drain on focus. Let's just zero in on hiring for a second, because the report flags it as this really unique problem. Unlike another meeting, hiring feels productive. We're growing the team, but it has these massive hidden costs, pulling your most senior, most valuable engineers away from building the actual product. Oh, and it gets worse. Look at this training gap. Nearly a third of all the engineers who are spending all this time conducting interviews have had zero formal training on how to do it. They're just winging it, which leads to inconsistent results and, you guessed it, even more wasted time for everybody. And this all leads to what the report calls the interviewer's paradox. Get this, the vast majority of engineers, 83%, actually say they enjoy doing interviews. But here's the kicker, only 13% of them think it's a high-impact use of their time. So their willingness to pitch in and help out is actually masking a huge systemic productivity problem. So what happens when this slow leak of time just keeps going, unchecked? Well, it eventually hits a tipping point. And this is the moment that quiet little erosion suddenly turns into a very loud and very expensive failure. People start quitting. The research found a really clear line in the sand, and that number is 9 hours. That's the critical point. When an engineer starts spending more than 9 hours a week on stuff that isn't coding, like all those meetings and interviews, something fundamental starts to change. They become, and get ready for this, 2.3 times more likely to list burnout as a top reason for wanting to leave their job. It's not a gradual slope. The risk just skyrockets once you cross that 9-hour mark. And you can see that playing out right here in why engineers quit. Take a look. Burnout and workload is a top 3 driver, right behind the usual suspects of growth and better pay. This isn't some theoretical issue. This misallocation of time is literally pushing your best people out the door. So here's the most important takeaway from all this. When you start to see your best engineers leaving, you're not actually seeing the problem. You're just seeing the result of a problem that started months, maybe even years ago, in the way their daily calendar was designed, or more accurately, how it was left completely undesigned. Okay, so that's the problem, and it's a big one. But the report is also super clear that this is solvable. It just requires a different way of thinking. You see, the best teams don't just manage for output, they actively design their entire system to protect focus.
And they do three things really, really well. First, they are absolutely ruthless about protecting engineering time. They offload or automate non-core work. Second, they measure what actually matters, like hours of uninterrupted deep work, not just story points. And third, they invest in infrastructure, like proper interview training, to make those necessary distractions as efficient as possible. At the end of the day, it all boils down to this one powerful mindset shift. Your team's time is not a free, infinite resource you can just spend on anything that pops up. It is a valuable, finite input that has to be invested strategically where it gets the highest return, which is building your product.
And the payoff for making this shift? It's huge. By simply reclaiming a few hours for each engineer every week, organizations see a 10 to 15% gain in their effective capacity. Think about that. That's like growing your team without hiring a single new person.
So, this all leaves us with one final question. This isn't a talent problem, it's a systems problem. It is a design problem. So, when you look at your own team's calendar, the question is, how will you design for focus?